The Uninvited, Chapter 1. I always knew I'd die this way, at my husband's hands. His breath stank of beer as he wrapped his hands more firmly around my throat. He was trying so hard to keep me still that I could feel drops of spit falling on my face. At first I was struggling, and then I gave up. Why fight this fight any longer? I was exhausted with life, and yet only 24. If I put up a fight and survived today, it would just be a matter of time until he had his hands around my throat again. Mother had warned me against him. She said she knew he was no good. But when I decided to marry him anyway, it took little effort for my mother to turn her back and walk away. What would she say now? "See, Mia, I told you he was good for nothing," she'd say through puffs of smoke. She might even chuckle at herself for always being right. My lungs ached, begging for air. I was ready to let go. I closed my eyes and gave myself to my husband's cruelty. An image came to mind. I saw myself as a little girl with big eyes, wild hair, untamable nature. What would that little girl have said if she knew how things would end? Would she have cried if she became aware of how crappy her life would be? In my mind, the little girl winked at me, smiled, and blew a kiss. Something woke within me, my fighting spirits, perhaps. I wasn't ready to die. Not today. I closed my eyes to see Jeff had turned crimson. His cheeks were swollen and his eyes were bulging from his sockets. He'd always been a weak man, and this proved it. Killing your wife shouldn't be that exhausting, surely. It took him by surprise when we made eye contact, and for an instant, I saw panic. It was all I needed to regain a sense of strength that I had lost years ago. I grabbed his wrists hard, grinding my nails into his flesh. He closed his eyes and yelped out in pain. The struggle wasn't over, Jeff, not by a long shot. The woman you had undermined for years was ready to be set free, ready to walk out the door and embrace the life she was destined for. I fought back with everything I had in me, and my life didn't end that day. It merely began. Chapter 2, 10 years later. I picked up the cold coffee cup that had been forgotten. The coffee was underwhelming and stale as it went down my throat. The hot and fresh aroma had left the cup while my mind ran through memories I wished I could shake. I wish I could say that I don't think of him often after all these years. It's been 10 years since I walked out of my husband's house. Our house is something it never was. I'd love to say that I never thought of the man I left behind, and that I was untouched by the years of abuse. However, sadly, my nightmares kept the memory of the man I married alive. I took a few deep breaths, relieved to be in the present. I wiped my eyes and sat up in the bed. My Labrador, Einstein, lifted his head and turned it sideways while staring at me. He did this often when I awoke this way, as if to say, "That was a bad dream, huh?" I got Einstein from a fellow expat who was on his way to further travels 7 years ago. Now, I never had a pet growing up, and I was surprised by how attached I became to the Labrador. At 12 years of age, this old boy is one of my most significant companions, one of two. My neighbor John is the other. Now I met John when I left the hustle and bustle of Bangkok behind and moved to Chai Nhat, 188 kilometers from Bangkok. After I walked out on Jeff, I needed to get far away. I borrowed some money from an old friend and booked a flight to Thailand. It felt incredible being in a new place, where no one knew me or my past. I could get lost in the crowds of unfamiliar faces without names. I felt more alive than ever. I had met friends in Bangkok, young, carefree travelers who had money to burn. They longed for the authentic foreign experiences, flings, festivals, and fun. Unlike them, however, it was never about the journey or the destination for me. I had a need. No, a burning desire to escape the place where I grew up, to forget the man who consumed my life for so long. You could quickly tell who had just arrived in Bangkok. Their lust for adventure and fun was undeniable. For them, the airplane carried a promise of a trip of a lifetime. The day I got into the aircraft, I knew I'd never return. I knew I'd never see my mother again. She abandoned me anyways, and I sat on the airplane and cried as if my mother had died, because she had to me. I taught English in Bangkok for the first 3 years. It was exciting. The food, the people, the culture, just all of it. I loved how the city was like a beehive, always bursting with movement and buzz. There was a great sense of freedom in being away from everyone and everything in my past. When I closed my eyes, only at night was I reminded of the past I longed to forget. I made friends with people who came and went. That's life of an expat. It was hard to say goodbye to people who had become friends. And after many painful goodbyes, I had made a silent deal with myself not to let people in. People were so disappointing. They either fucked you up, as my husband had done, or left you. Both left scars. Just after my 25th birthday, I got an online tutoring job. I would tutor students from all over the world, and I could do it from the comfort of my own home. I just needed a laptop. Since it was with international students, class times would differ because of time zones. But I could adjust my teaching hours. I loved the job straight away. I no longer had to drive in traffic, attend meetings, and best of all, I could teach in my pajamas if I really wanted to. I never did though. I felt it right to get up, shower, and at least be presentable when my working day started. Working from home offered me a calmness that I hadn't experienced in Thailand yet. I felt happy not to be stuck in the hustle of it all. My home became my cocoon, my haven. However, I felt my studio apartment was a snug fit for Einstein and me. I often thought about what it would be like to live somewhere where skyscrapers and morning traffic didn't really surround me. It wasn't long until I started looking over my shoulder. Old habits of battered wives, I suppose. Then finally the city began to suffocate me. Chai Nhat seemed like a logical decision. Open spaces, relaxed pace of life, and most importantly, a small stream of people. On a sunny Tuesday morning, I was having my coffee. I smiled to myself and decided that there was really no reason why I couldn't have that. I could find a house in the countryside. What prevented me? I bet I could get a home for the same price that I paid for my small apartment in the city's heart. I could even look for a place with a small garden for Einstein and a spot for my Jeep. Deciding that this was the right decision, I went to an estate agent conveniently placed down the road from my apartment. The agent seemed confused when I said I wanted to move out of the city, as if this was a trick of some sort. The ramblings of a crazy person. After a few phone calls, he smiled and told me he found the perfect place. And he was right. The house was old but well maintained. It was a 3-bedroom house with wooden floors, a big open-plan kitchen and a big garden. The garden appeared to have been neglected, but I saw this as an exciting challenge. Soon after, I packed my things and moved to Thailand. That's when I met John. Although 20 years my senior, John became my best friend. He became my family, really. We were the same in so many ways. He was also American, and he was also alone. But most of all, he never asked too much or shared too much. Our friendship blossomed over the next 10 years, and not having John in my life became unimaginable. There wasn't a sexual connection between us, which was refreshing. After my years with Jeff, I had no desire to be close to a man sexually. The highlight of my week was always a Saturday morning. John and I would take the overly excited Einstein for a walk to the Shinat Bird Park. The old dog would smell the grass, chase the birds he could never catch, and just seem so much younger than his years. After a week of my only interaction with people being online, I treasured these mornings with my friend. John was great at making conversation, but he was also a good listener. He was the only person I'd ever told about my husband in Thailand, although the word husband should never be linked to a man like that. John was the only person I trusted after years of friendship. He had become my reasoning and peace of mind. Talking to my friend about the ghosts of my past put them at bay. If only I closed my eyes at night. We'd walk and talk for hours, and when we'd get home, I'd always invite him over for an early dinner. We'd cook something mediocre, neither of us being incredible in the kitchen, while Einstein would sleep off the day's adventure. On a Saturday night, much like any other of the years before, while we were having dinner, John told me about a new virus that he had been reading about on the internet. It's called COVID-19, and they feared that its impact might be as intense as SARS or worse. We sat in silence as each of us took a moment to process the impact of something like that. Finally, I shook it off, hoping that it was just a dramatic ploy used by the media to sell their news. Life as we knew it would continue, I promised myself, as if that was something I could control. Today marks my 10th year in Thailand, John, I said, the words sounding like a lie in my ears. The years had flown by, but I felt so at home that it felt like I had been here much, much longer. Time could do that, I suppose, to feel long and short at the same time. John's eyes lit up excitedly as a broad smile appeared on his unshaven face. I realized he looked like a man years his junior. Handsome, healthy, and sexy. 10 years, Mia? He said enthusiastically while raising his glass and added, I hope I have you around for many more. I returned his smile shyly and replied, Yes, Thailand is my home, just as it is yours. I've given it some thought, and I think it's time to invest in some property here. Now, John looked delighted and told me how proud he was of me. And the words meant so much coming from him. I told him about the flyer I received in the mail yesterday. And he shook his head, smiling. Of course, he would have received one too. Now, I'm sure it'll be a great space to rent out to people who want to live in the city, on a long-term or even short-term basis, I explained. Or it might be a great place for you to live, Mia. You'll meet new people and possibly date. John winked at me. I rolled my eyes playfully, hoping he didn't see that I was blushing, and responded by saying Einstein was used to the large open spaces that China offered. However, John's encouragement was the final push I needed. I made a mental note to contact the agent first thing Sunday morning to set up a viewing time. I felt a shiver in the back of my neck, but shook it off and focused on the meal and the man in front of me. Chapter 3. The bed sheets feel wet and sticky on my skin. I can hear my heart beating in my ears between the screams coming from my throat. Cries that never reach my mouth. I'm wearing a mask, a surgical mask. It makes it hard to breathe, as if someone's holding a hand over my mouth. I need to stay calm, I tell myself. It's the only way I'll get away from him. He's lying on top of me. He opens his mouth, exposing his yellow teeth and plump, red tongue. He leans closer to my face and bites my mask off. I feel relief as I can breathe freely again. But my consolation is short-lived, as the smell that's over my senses. The stench. He smells of beer, cigarettes, and urine. He starts to chew on the mask until only the sides remain, dangling from his lips, resembling worms trying to escape out of his dark and dirty mouth. I scream as he laughs deeply and slowly. This time, my scream escapes my throat. I'm awakened by my own cry for help, lying in a puddle of my urine, in my bed, alone. I sigh, equally out of relief that it's yet again only a nightmare, and irritation at my childlike tendency to wet the bed. What are you looking at? You pee on trees, I said to Einstein as he raised his head to stare at me. I get all my bedding bundled up and head over to the washroom. As I load it all, I look over at John's place. I can see the dim yellow light of his office lamp burning the midnight oil at this hour. John is a psychology professor at Chao Phraya University. Never married. He always said jokingly that he was married to knowledge. His seductress was his quest to understand the human mind. The repetitive sounds from the washing machine comforted me as I tried to shake off my latest nightmare. I felt an urge to shower, as if I could wash it off, free myself of this prison of my mind coming to haunt me at night. I felt better with the hot water running down my body. I thought about viewing the condo in the morning. The flyer colorfully boasted a beautiful large apartment complex. In my mind, I could see it being the kind of place where people were drawn to. I could imagine laughter as children splashed each other in one of the 3 large swimming pools. I could see bulky men comparing their expanding muscles in the gym. I could see young, single women meeting up at the coffee shop to catch up after a long day at work. The flyer also sold an illusion of a perfect apartment, completed with furnished rooms, warm reading nooks, a fully equipped kitchen, and 2 large balconies with sunbeds, umbrellas, and waterfall features. The Italian coffee system was an especially nice touch. I loved coffee, warm, dark, and comforting always. Another drink that offered comfort, warmth, and added the feeling of numbness to me was gin, specifically pink gin. John had given me a bottle of pink gin for my 26th birthday. We laughed at how girly the drink seemed and managed to see the bottom of the bottle by the night's end. Since that night, I always kept a bottle in the house. Or more accurately, a few, since they didn't last long these days. Turning off the faucet, I thought of the new condo I'd be viewing in the morning. I hoped I'd love it, and that things would go smoothly. Instead, I felt a reluctance that left me as soon as it came. Finally, I got a clean blanket and managed to sleep for a couple of hours on the sofa before Einstein woke me for his morning walk. The drive to Bangkok was uneventful. The way you want your movements to the city to be. I met the agent, Arthur, 20 minutes early. If he was irritated by my early arrival, he didn't show it. He was larger than most Thai men, with an open face and a big, white smile. I was familiar with a relatively common name amongst Thai men, and knew it meant man of the sun. In Arthur's case, this was true. He seemed like he was filled with light, laughter, and genuine happiness. He also seemed like someone who would be pretty busy after hours in the gay club scene. Arthur seemed surprised that I was alone and that no one would accompany me to the condo. I thought back to our conversation and wondered if I made it sound like someone's accompanying me. Perhaps there was a cultural difference. The idea of a young foreign female wanting to buy property without the help of a man could be strange, I guessed. Was that still such an unthinkable thought in our current day? I shook off the awkwardness of his surprise, and we walked into the new complex, chatting about little things that didn't matter. My first thought as I entered the complex's massive gates were clinical. It seemed cold and unfriendly. There were no laughing kids, no small dogs barking and sniffing each other. Instead, the whole place seemed dead. The walls had a shade of greyness to them, as if they carried storms inside them. Although they were clearly painted white quite recently, the garden was beautiful, with large trees, luscious green grass and flower beds. It had come alive, but it made the rest of the concrete jungle seem even more unwelcoming. The buildings stood loud and bold, all empty, with windows without people. I had read years earlier about ghost cities in China, a whole city built but never used. This made me think of that, and I felt a shiver going down my spine. The happy, warm image that the flyer had portrayed seemed like a big, fat lie. Arthur must have picked up on my disappointment because he quickly said no one had moved in yet. The last touches were still being made, but not to worry. It was going to be a spectacular place to live. And his $1 million smile offered a bit of reassurance. I fought the urge to thank him for his time and leave right away. "You're already here, asshole. Just go see it," I said to myself in the privacy of my own being. As we walked through the newly painted buildings, I felt that I was being watched. No, stalked. Instead, I felt like prey being observed intensely before being attacked and consumed. Arthur smiled at me and giggled a little, adding, "How do you feel about stairs? Since construction isn't completely finished. The elevators aren't working yet." I shrugged and said, "Yeah, I haven't exercised much lately. I could climb a flight or two." But of course, it wasn't a flight or two. Instead, we dragged ourselves up 10 flights of stairs. By the time we had reached the penthouse floor, we were out of breath, sweating and ready to faint. "I came prepared," smiled Arthur as he passed me a bottle of sparkling water. I nearly kissed the man of the sun. We both slugged our bottles down in big gulps, ignoring the burn of the gas going down our throats. Arthur asked if I was ready to continue, but I nodded whilst wiping my brow. We both laughed as he unlocked the door. After the disappointment I felt since entering the complex, I went into the apartment expecting very little. But I couldn't believe my eyes. The condo was exactly as the proud flyer had shown. It was large, open, sunny, and it felt like home. It was almost surreal to walk into the space after the emptiness we had experienced just outside the storms. Arthur took me through the entire apartment, slowly, thoroughly pointing out key features as we went. The apartment had 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a very spacious and modern kitchen, and an open-plan dining room area adjacent to the living room, which hosted the most comfortable leather sofa that I had ever seen. The sofa seemed so flirtatious, as if it could come to life, wink and say, "Sit on me, baby." The 2 glass doors led out to the balconies. Both balconies sported lounge chairs, patio sets, umbrellas, and water features. Balcony that led out of the main bedroom even had a jacuzzi. I was so taken aback by this hidden gem that I felt confused. How is this place already completed and furnished when the rest of this complex is still empty? And then I added shyly while feeling a blush creeping up from under my face, "Why is it so affordable?" This question seemed to satisfy Arthur to a great extent. He gave me another one of his perfect smiles and said, "Because, my lovely lady, this here is our demo. It's the apartment we use to show people who want to see what living here would be like. We use this dream home to sell dream homes to other people. So, this can literally be your dream home." I smiled back and nodded. Sure seemed like a dream home. I returned to Einstein in Chinat, wondering if the apartment was truly as I remembered it. Suddenly I wondered if I had felt naked, cold, and exposed while walking through it. Have the eyes of strangers followed me? Did I hear my name echoing off the walls as I walked out the door? "Don't be stupid, man. Grow up," I told myself as I turned the shower on. I felt the same relief I had felt in the early morning hours, happy to wash off the day that had passed. That night Arthur went to his favorite gay bar, the Hot Male, to celebrate the sale of his demo home. He was so sure that he had lost the deal after entering the doll complex, but things immediately turned around once Mia saw the apartment. It was a quick and easy sale. The excitement of sex was in the air. It had been a few days since he had seen his new man, and he could hardly contain his excitement to see him and tell him about his successful day. Chapter 4. A villain overshadowed the next 8 weeks. COVID-19 had made the world its prisoner. People of the world had grown scared, nervous, and impatient as the number of cases grew hour by hour. Countries had started talking about locking their borders, cities, and lives. Suddenly I had a new monster sharing my night terrors with my stepfather. I was worried about my finances. Due to the virus and talks of lockdowns, most of my international online students had put their classes on hold. I understood this, of course, but I still had to survive. I had spent all my savings when I bought the condo, and I didn't have a family to run back to for financial support. I had even gone so far as to ask Arthur if I could sell the condo, but he explained in a cheerful voice that the property market was asleep now due to the virus. No one was buying. I thought about applying for teaching jobs, but it quickly became apparent that this wasn't an option. Schools were on edge about possible closures too. No one wanted to spend money if they didn't absolutely have to. The world around me had gone into saving mode, and I was on the outside. I looked at my finances online, sighing and feeling a wave of emotions driven by depression and worry. Even though my house in China wasn't expensive, it was still eating into my minimal monthly earnings now that my classes were dropping faster than leaves falling during autumn. I scratched Einstein's head, the old lab feeling my unease possibly. For the moment, however, I put these concerns in the back of my mind and focused on the happy face smiling at me from my laptop screen. Travis was one of my favorite students. He was a 6-year-old boy from Taiwan. I was grateful not to see myself as we sang the old English classics such as the Hokey Pokey and Bingo. Travis explained that his mother was upset with him for taking candy from a stranger in the convenience store. I listened to his dramatic retelling of her anger, smiled and said, "Stranger danger, Travis, your mom is right." He found this hilarious, and his laughter went all the way up to his eyes as he chanted, "Stranger danger, stranger danger." He begged me for another song, and we danced and sang the ABC song. Travis thanked me as he always did, and his mom appeared on the screen. I could tell what was about to follow wasn't going to be good. Miss Chen explained, somewhat embarrassed, about being fearful for the financial implications that the virus would bring. Even though Taiwan was still stable regarding COVID, her husband wanted her to turn every penny and prepare for rainy days that might just appear. They will have one last session next week. Then it will all be on standby until the madness has blown over. It's a speech I've heard several times over the last few weeks. I told her I understood and felt thankful that I saw Travis's sweet and happy face one last time before uncertainty set in. Closing my laptop, I sighed again. I knew what would lift my spirits. I called Einstein as I grabbed his leash. "Here, boy!" I added when I didn't hear his usual excitement approaching. Still nothing. A sudden dread came over me. It was almost like I was frozen on the spot. And only the dog's appearance could defrost me. I dug deeper and moved through the house, calling his name as I went. Finally, I found him in my bedroom, spread out on my bed, looking peaceful, as if he was sleeping happily. I knew before I even touched him, my dog had died. Darkness set in me that I wasn't prepared for. I fell onto the bed next to him and bawled, still holding his leash. I cried for the loss of my dog, my companion, my friend. I cried over the emptiness that surrounded me. I cried over my newfound financial complication. I cried and cried until I was so tired that I drifted off into a turmoil my mind's creation. I'm walking in the garden of my home. It's a garden that I take great pride in. Einstein is at my side, as he has always been every day for the past 7 years. We walk over to the herbs that have been growing in the shaded area. I see an unfamiliar rod sticking out of the ground. Einstein sniffs around and starts licking and chewing on the rod. As much as I tried to stop my dog, he seems possessed by this foreign object. He seems to change shape as he bites and licks it. It starts to resemble a hand. A hand I know, which has haunted my dreams for years. I grab Einstein by his ears, but the dog won't let go. The hand seems to enjoy the struggle, taunting me as it sinks deeper into the Labrador. Finally, it seems to have taken hold of Einstein, and the hand starts to drag him into the dirt from which it came. I pull with all my strength, but the hand seems to have a godlike power that I just can't match. Einstein whines and cries for help, but I'm helpless. Tears roll down my face as I scream for my dog to be released. Einstein gets pulled into the ground with the hand, leaving me with my hands in the dirt. I woke up feeling empty, sad and alone. Lonelier than I had felt in years. Silence hugged me uncomfortably and uninvitedly, feeling heavy like a blanket that had been soaked in ice cold water. I needed to say goodbye to my loyal companion today. He deserved to be laid to rest, buried, but never forgotten. And so I buried Einstein in the garden that afternoon. I thought about keeping his collar, but sending such an old friend into the afterlife with no name, identity or self-worth seemed wrong. I buried him close to the flowers that he loved to smell and bite on occasion. He had been stung by the bees several times, but the flowers still grew him. John came over and held me as I cried and cried. He quietly sat and listened to my sobs as I was overcome with memories of my dog. After what felt like hours of constant sobbing, my body seemed to stop. I still sobbed, but my sobs seemed to be more controlled and calming down. Wiping my very swollen eyes, I look over at John. He met my eyes, smiled and said, "Hi." I took a deep breath and replied to his greeting. I knew the pain would return, but for the time being, I felt a relief in being able to control my own tears. John and I sat in silence, drinking our gin and looking at the sunset. I must have been constantly crying since around 10 that morning. I hoped and prayed for a deep night of sleep and dreamless sleep that night. I looked over at John and he looked exhausted too. The burial and my falling apart had taken their toll on him. I felt sorry for putting this emotional burden on my dear friend, my only remaining friend. I offered to refill his glass and he leaned over and took my hand. He took a deep breath as if hoping to find relief. But instead he said, "Mia, I'm so sorry to do this now, but this can't wait. The university has announced that the rest of the semester will be online only." He smiled sheepishly and added, "I'm going to be teaching online, like you." Although they were dry, I wiped my eyes with the back of my hand and said, Well, if you can't beat him, maybe our lunch breaks will coincide and we can cook together. His face turned stern. He had a sadness in him I hadn't seen before. Seeing John like this made me feel even worse. The knot in my stomach seemed to be growing by the second as I realized that there was bad news coming my way. I had an idea of what it could be. He took a deep breath, squeezed my hand tightly, and continued carefully in a gentle tone, as if he was telling a baby a bedtime story. With all this uncertainty surrounding us right now, I need to return to the US, Mia. My family need me. They are afraid. No one knows how long this will last. And they are afraid that it might be a very long time before they see me if I don't go now. He rumbled all of it so nervously and quickly that I couldn't help but wonder how many times he had rehearsed it before saying it to me. I'll never choose to leave you, Mia. Please believe that, especially now. This isn't something I wanted for either of us. I looked at John as he awaited my reply with his lively, large blue eyes. I noticed now he had a bit of grey in his curly hair. It was as if I saw him clearly for the first time. He was a very handsome, older man. Of course he had people who worried about him. But of course, he would do the right thing and join his family, offering physical, emotional, financial support wherever he could during the pandemic. That's why I came over tonight, he stated. Then thoughtfully added, I am so thankful that I did, and I'm here for you, Mia. In fact, come with me. I chuckled at his heartfelt offer, not meaning to offend him. We both knew there was no chance in hell I'd ever go back to the US. Just the thought of stepping onto the same continent that housed the animal that abused me was enough to make me sick. However, I still appreciated his words. I wondered how he could truly be happy that he came over tonight. Why would any man sign up for this hysteria? I guess that's true friendship. When do you need to leave? I asked, trying to keep my voice as steady as I could. I leave in 3 days, he answered awkwardly. I nodded and we continued with our drinks in silence until I couldn't keep my eyes open. Bedtime, Mia, sweetheart, he whispered as he kissed my head. We took our glasses into the kitchen, rinsed them off, and left. That night I had no nightmares. My ex never arrived in my dreams because I didn't sleep. I tossed and turned for what felt like days on end. Finally, I gave up and got up before the sun rose. I sat outside on my patio with a hot cup of coffee. I listened to the absence of sound. No cars, people, or reminders of day-to-day life. The only musicians of this hours were the bugs. I glanced over at Einstein's grave and then at John's house. I've lost both males who were so dear to me in one day. Yes, John would return, but the virus came without a timeline. No one had any answers, and I dreaded not having him and Einstein to share my days with. I dreaded walking down the street without my beloved dog and meeting John for our weekly bird park adventures. I realized I had already made my decision. It was time. I needed to move on. I needed to let this house go and lessen my emotional burdens and the financial ones. At a decent hour, I'd called Mr. Satan, my landlord. I was sure he'd understand. I honestly hoped he would. Immediately I felt a little lighter, as if a heavy load had been somewhat lifted. He understood. In fact, Mr. Satan was relieved when I called. He explained that the factory his sister was working at had shut down due to COVID-19, and she was desperate to return to the countryside as the city was more expensive and people were on edge. Therefore, she would move into the house. I told him to keep my deposit since I neglected to give him proper notice, but he insisted that he would return all of it since it benefited him too. Although I didn't truly feel like I deserved it, I welcomed the idea of money. I could use it to buy food, necessities that could last until life returned to normality. I called Arthur next and informed him of my decision to move to the condo. He sounded utterly delighted, but he always sounded this way. I felt like I was rushing against the clock, and rightly so. An hour after the two calls, Prime Minister Prayut Chan-o-cha announced that Thailand would become a lockdown state until conditions improved. People would not be able to enter or exit the country. Schools, businesses and shops would close until the lockdown had been lifted. The time for self-quarantine had arrived. He announced a 72-hour preparation period. Before this would be our new way of life, for now at least. I knew that chaos would follow. I knew that shops would be flooded with nervous locals trying to buy all they could to keep their families fed and healthy, while the greyness of the virus settled like a mist on the mountain top. I packed all I owned and threw out what I had outgrown or didn't need. Arthur very kindly offered to help me carry all my belongings up to the top floor. He would meet me the following day. John had also offered to help, but I knew that he had his own battles to fight against time. Also, I dreaded the idea of having to say goodbye to him for an undetermined time, and I'd been keeping him at arm's length since he told me about going back to the US. We said goodbye on a Wednesday morning. I had locked my house for the last time and handed the keys over to Mr. Satan. He handed me a bag full of dragon fruit along with my deposit. He wished me well and we hugged each other. I was thankful to him for his house, and I was grateful for the memories that I had made in it and for the person I had become in it. I would miss this house profoundly. As Mr. Satan drove away in his old Toyota, John appeared on his patio. We looked at each other, and time seemed to stand still for a little bit. And then, finally, he came over, and we chatted awkwardly about his flight plans and my new place. "Look, this is for you," John said nervously, removing a tiny envelope from his jean pocket. I was surprised and took it from him. Immediately I felt the thickness on the envelope. It was filled with money. "John, no," I protested, my pride prohibiting me from even considering this kind of gesture. "Mia, please. It's not much, but it's yours. I want you to have it. I'm not sure when I'll see you again. Use it if you need it. You can even give it back to me if we meet again, if that makes you feel better. I really want you to take it. Please." He begged, and I shoved the envelope back at him. Not because I was ungrateful, but because I couldn't accept it. He was disappointed, but he took it and put it back in his pocket. The elephant in the room was looming over us, and it was clear we were both dreading the goodbye. John took me by the shoulders, looked into my eyes and said, "Goodbye, Mia. Take care of yourself. Remember, I'm only one phone call away, anytime." Before I could respond, he kissed me, a light and brief kiss. His lips were warm and soft. His beard felt more delicate than it looked. He smelled of caramel and cinnamon. As he pulled away, I saw his eyes were filled with tears, and so were mine. We both laughed as we wiped our eyes, equally taken aback by the flood of emotions. I got into my Jeep, rolled down the window. John took my hand and told me to drive safely. He told me this wasn't the end of our path. We would always be there for each other. I nodded because I knew it was the truth. I left, driving slowly, watching him become smaller and smaller as he stood in the road waving while watching me drive away. I cried until I couldn't see him anymore. And then I cried some more. I felt it was good to let it all out. This chapter of my life needed a praised ending. My tears were proof of that. Arthur kept his word, offering his strength to carry bags to my new home several times. I heard him grunting and sighing occasionally, but he never once complained. When we were finished, I offered him a Kochang beer. He couldn't hide his delight. He drank his beer. I asked him about the safety of living here. He laughed wholeheartedly and said, "Yes, darling, of course, the plans for this complex have been approved. It's all on the standard." I felt silly, meaning not the structural safety, but the physical safety of me living here alone. I decided to let it rest. After thanking me for the beer, and me in return thanking him for all his help, Arthur gave a dramatic bow and left. I was here, home. I hoped it would begin to feel like home soon. I looked at the bags, exploding with my life on the floor, and decided that unpacking could wait until the morning. I felt that I deserved a drink on my new balcony. I poured myself a strong pink gin and tonic in a fancy-looking glass that I found in the kitchen. The fridge came with an ice maker, which dutifully spat out perfectly formed small ice blocks. I took a seat on the sunbed on the balcony that led out of my bedroom. It was already late afternoon. I took a big gulp of the drink. I drank to Einstein, resting peacefully amongst the flowers he loved so dearly. I drank to John, who was about to board a plane and return to the people who deeply loved him, the people he belonged to. I took a deep breath, determined to keep my touches of melancholy at bay today. Today marked a new beginning. I had cried enough the past few days. Now I needed to pick myself up and look ahead. I looked at the sight in front of me. I repeated Arthur's words. "It's going to be spectacular." I believed it would be. Some people would arrive, the pools will be filled, and the entire space would come alive soon. I thought about COVID-19 and the massive influences it had on people around the globe. People sitting in their houses, afraid of going outside. I thought of all the people fighting, pushing into stores to buy the last of the surgical masks that they had available, people buying thousands of sheets of toilet paper. My heart bled for the people not being able to see the ones they loved. It seemed unimaginable that the power of something that couldn't be seen with the human eye had on all of us. I took another sip of my drink and considered myself fortunate. I had a home to live in, food to eat, and I was healthy. Life could be worse. Could always be worse. That night I climbed into my new bed. Felt at peace for the first time in a long time. Maybe things had worked out for the best. Perhaps this was fate, laying out my new path for me. As I drifted off into a deep sleep, I swear I could hear a voice coming from the shadows. It said, "Welcome home, Mia." Chapter 5. Again! Travis insisted loudly as I finished reading The Ugly Duckling. I laughed and said, "No, you know we need to practice your ABCs, Travis." He didn't argue, and we started going through the letters one by one. A. This is an apple. This is an ant. We chanted in harmony. I was gonna miss these lessons with this lovely boy. I hoped I would get to teach him the future again. T. This is a tiger. This is a tank. Stranger danger, Travis shouted. I laughed and clapped my hands. You remembered. What a clever boy you are, Travi, I said proudly. Stranger danger, Travis repeated and lifted his finger to his lips, gesturing a secret. He laughed and shook his head as if in a silent conversation with someone. I could hear his mother rushing him. Our time together had come to an end. Another end had arrived. We said our goodbyes and I turned off the laptop. Our last class was done. I hoped I would see his sweet face again in the future. The rest of the day was uneventful. I knew that most of my days in the near future would be this way. That night, as I lay in bed, I thought back to my conversation with Travis. Reflected back at him saying, "Stranger danger," and promising to keep a secret from an unknown person. I felt an unease take over me. What if he wasn't showing me that he remembered the phrase I taught him in previous lessons? What if he was warning me? I slept with my bedside lamp on that night. My night was filled with confusing visions of white walls, staircases that led nowhere, and empty swimming pools too deep to get out of.